Good day, traders. Hope everybody's doing good and welcome to my learning space. Without wasting any time, let's get straight into today's video. We're going to be talking about MPL as well as Quasimodo. Let's start by defining the maximum pain level, right? It's a trick played by market makers to entice retail traders into opening positions out of fear or panic. Thus hunting stop losses from reversal traders and taking out orders from breakout traders, right? It's also a fake out where decision is mainly to be made on the FTR price. It mainly consists of a rally drop, support, resistance, and a fake out. Now, if you've been following my channel, you realize that this concept is actually familiar, and we actually got into detail or spoke about it in detail when we were talking about liquidity, right? Because this maximum pain level is just another way to just define liquidity, right? Because when you get to the types of maximum pain levels, you will see what I'm talking about. Let's start with the first example. So you have a drop, right? And then the market creates this low, right? Now it takes it out and then comes back. In this instance, you have a drop, you have the market forming a resistance. So we'll call this resistance 1 because it's a resistance that's only been tested once, right? And then you have this fake out and then you have a drop. Now, this right here then becomes your MPL zone, right? The inverse would be true if we had a movement to the upside. So here, like I said, the opposite is true. You have a rally, you have support, and I'll call it S1. You have a fake out, and then you have the strong push to the upside. And on this area right here, you have an MPL zone. If you've watched that liquidity video, don't log out yet because there's still more, and you realize why this is relevant, especially when we're talking about Quasimodo, right? So please be patient with me, right? Now, another type of MPL, this one over here, right? So you could have a rally, right? And then the market forming resistance. So we call this resistance 1, and then resistance 2, right? And then you have a fake out and then a drop. Or you have a rally, support, support 2, fake out, and a push to the upside. So this is called an R1 MPL, an S1 MPL, R2 MPL, S2 MPL. And let's not forget that they all form an MPL zone, right? So these are the ones that yield the most or the highest probability. These are the common ones. You also find MPL 3s and whatnot. So this is all that you need to know on MPLs. If you watch that video on liquidity and also manipulation, you'll get to understand in depth why this happens, right? So that's why it seems as though I'm just skimming through this topic, because I believe that we have already spoken about this topic in detail. So if you still haven't watched that, the links to those videos will be in the description box below. Now, how is this relevant to Quasimodo? Let me delete everything and then we'll talk. I think I've hinted on the type of pattern that this is, especially in the ICT mitigation and breaker videos. So with Quasimodo patterns, there's 3 types of patterns. You have your general pattern, you have your intermediate pattern, and then you have your advanced pattern. So these patterns differ with their strike rates. By strike rates, I'm talking about their win rate. So the advanced pattern is the one with the highest win rate, followed by the intermediate pattern, and then lastly, your general pattern. Now, because we trade probability and we're looking for trades that are high probability, I wouldn't recommend, unless the context allows, that I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you look out for general patterns. But if you see it in the market, feel free to approach it. But I'd feel more comfortable trading advanced patterns and intermediate patterns. So this one I'm sure you've seen before. Basically, it looks like this, right? It looks like that. Now, let's identify each and every component of this pattern so that we can easily identify it in a context of a real market, right? So yes, this is how a Quasimodo general pattern would look like. So assume that the market is going up, forming an uptrend. This is a sell scenario, by the way. The inverse is true for a buy scenario. So assume that the market was going up, formed a higher high, formed a higher low, and then a higher high as is expected. Now we suddenly have this shift in momentum, a huge momentum, right? That engulfs an order block here. So we know that most of the time when the market breaks through a previous high, we consider it as an area of liquidity, we consider it as a break of structure. So when market breaks a higher high to form a new high, we consider it a break of structure. And the rule is that the market will return to an order block that formed before the break of structure. So if you get an instance where instead of the market reversing from that order block, the market engulfs that higher high, forming a higher low, it most of the time will return to a QM level. So this higher high then turns into a QM level, and this is where you should be taking your sell, and then your stop loss above structure, and then your take profit on your lower low. So this is the general pattern, and this is how it looks. Now let's move on. Now we're done with the general pattern. We're moving on to the intermediate pattern. Now an intermediate pattern is similar to a general pattern, just that we have an MPL, any type of an MPL on a QM level. Let me illustrate, right? So usually when you get a retest right here, you'll find an MPL forming here and a drop. Now the same engulfment of the low, and then the market will return to that QM level and then drop, right? So you have to note that you have an MPL over here, and also do not forget about the MPL zone. So usually in this instance, your stop loss is above the MPL zone, right? Thus lowering the risk compared to the general pattern where your stop loss was above structure, right? And we still have that low over here, the high over here, and I'll only label the QM level here, right? So it looks exactly like a general pattern, just that we have an MPL zone. And like I said, this is in the context of a sell scenario. The opposite is true if you're in a buy scenario. So let's move on to the advanced Quasimodo pattern. Now, it's similar to an intermediate pattern, just that we have another bigger MPL. Let me explain. So in a context of a sell scenario, again, you have this higher high, higher low, higher high, right? This QML level forming, this MPL forming, similar to the intermediate pattern, this engulf of this demand zone over here, right? So this bearish engulf, and then this support that was formed by the low, forming or turning into resistance. Now, as we all know from previous lessons, that as soon as retail traders see this being resistance, they are led into assuming that in the long run, this is where they should be taking sells. But what actually happens is that the market generates liquidity, and eventually you get a fake out, right? So it can be a 1 MPL, it can be, it can be a 1R, it can be a 2R MPL, it can be a 3R MPL. But after that MPL, you get a fake out, testing into the MPL zone from this level over here, and then you get a drop. This pattern over here is the one that yields the highest returns. It's the one that you need to look out for. Now, quick notes, these are some of the things that you need to note, especially when trading QML patterns. So this is what you should note. For these patterns to be confirmed, there should be a break of structure and also an MPL. So yeah, let's go to the live charts and see examples from the live charts. Right, so this is example 1 of the advanced pattern. So as you can see right here, we have this QML over here. We have this high over here. We have this break of this low over here. RR, and then a retest back to this MPL zone and a drop. So this is where you're going to take profit. From the beginning of this channel, ever since I started putting videos on this channel, I've been saying one thing over and over again, and that is, I do not want you to think as a pattern trader. Rather, you should see patterns as a form of reference, right? I want you guys to think in terms of like the reasoning behind certain movements. That's where you need to get, so that when you see these patterns occurring in the market, you know how to approach them. And it's not a matter of remembering the pattern, right? Because if you memorize patterns according to how they look in the textbook, when you get to a real life market and they do not look exactly how you imagined from your textbook, it becomes a problem. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Let's move on to another example. So this is an example of what I think is an intermediate pattern because of this 1 MPL over here, right? So this can be easily classified as a false or a fake out. And this is where you could buy and take profit at this high over here. So this is an S1, right? So I hope you guys see it. I hope this is clear. And let's move on to another example. Right, this is another example of an advanced pattern. As you can see, we've had 3 retests of this resistance, right? And then as the market came back, this is where you should place an entry, right? Remember, guys, there's a theory before this. And I always say that when I talk about these patterns, you should not necessarily dump the knowledge prior to this. So we talked about identifying supply and demand levels. We talked about liquidity, and we talked about inefficiency and all of those things. So do not neglect that kind of information. So this could be used with the aid of that knowledge. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, let's move on to another example. So this is all I have for today, guys. For you to get used to seeing these patterns, I'd suggest that you have many posters that you have on your wall, at least 2 to 3 examples of each type of Quasimodo pattern. So a Quasimodo pattern in the context of a buy and sell, maybe a general pattern that for buy or sell, the textbook pattern, and also a real life chart, and get your eyes or get your brain used to seeing these kinds of patterns. But yeah, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this. I tried to keep this as short as I possibly could. Yeah, please subscribe if you still haven't. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment. And then we'll see each other in the next video. For now, peace.